starting from the beginning here. I want to start off actually with an exercise. I'm gonna take 1 minute to try to design an RNA that's only 15 nucleotides long, 15 bases. Um, the letters themselves are not important; it's just the shape. I wanted to begin this way before moving forward. Admittedly, starting with a much smaller design than some of the ones that were featured. There we go. It could be done wherever, pen and paper, uh, puzzle maker, simply uh, in your own mind, even, whichever way works. I'll give it about 20 more seconds. All right. Very nice. Very nice. So, why did I ask you to do this? Well, let's see. There we go. So, the design that you've come up with is very likely brand new to Eterna. There's actually over 2,000 designs that can be made with an RNA of only 15 nucleotides. Interestingly, in the 10 years that Eterna's been public, there's only been, and I just checked this even this morning, there's only been 65 designs that are of this length, uh, but which I've shown on the right here. But what I've highlighted are, in fact, duplicates. And so, in terms of unique designs, there's only 44. And so, you had essentially a 100% chance of creating a new design. And feel free to publish those later if you wish. It can't hurt. And so, it turns out that adding a single base to the end of our RNA really makes a big difference. By the time you get to 25 bases long, there are over 2 million unique designs that can be made uh, for an RNA of that length. Uh, a number which approximates something that I struggle to wrap my mind around. Uh, Quite a large number. However, it turns out that this is an exponential problem. For each base that we add to our RNA, the number of possible new designs that we get afterward doubles from the previous number of designs we could have made. And if we continue this, making our RNA longer and longer, by the time we get to 269 nucleotides, there's 1.2 times 10 to the 80 possible designs. Uh, this being higher, in fact, than than many of the estimates for the number of atoms in the universe. But based on that doubling power, if we add a single nucleotide to make it 270 nucleotides long, we've just created twice as many designs as there are atoms in the universe. But as many of you are aware, uh, the limits, at least as of yesterday, the limits in Eterna were 400 nucleotides, which means we can create 1.6 times 10 to the 119 designs. Just a ridiculously big number. Uh, it's impossible to even truly fathom. Uh, and if every single person on Earth right now were a member of Eterna, and of course, why wouldn't we want them to be? And they were to submit 3 truly unique designs every single day, the max number we've been allowed, it would take 1.8 times 10 to the 106 years to publish all possible designs from 1 nucleotide through 400 nucleotides. And incidentally, the heat death of the universe is expected to occur in only 1 times 10 to the 106 years. And these calculations are only for a single stem. I've ignored multi-stem designs, pseudonauts, tertiary interactions, as mentioned earlier, and quaternary structures, intermolecular interactions. And oh boy, that's a lot. And it really does seem like it's too much to be able to make sense of. I mean, where do we even start to approach that amount of just sheer diversity of creative potential in a single RNA molecule? And so perhaps the best place to start would be categorizing our designs based on their general topology, right? If we fold or stretch them, right, will they be, can we make a single design from 2 different ones, or are they distinct after those changes? Essentially, we're counting the stems of designs. And I did this for the Eterna 100, which took some time. For every single one, redrew them in the schematic form, each one kind of representing its own class of molecules, if you will, that we would encounter, and the types of nodes and junctions we would expect to see. And if you group them together, it turns out that the Eterna 100 is really just a variation on 47 different themes. The most common one of which being a single stem, stretched and twisted in one way or another through the addition of bulges or internal loops, into a large variety of seemingly different forms. But at the end of the day, they're all still a single stem. And since we can break down any RNA structure, any more complex RNA structure into single stems, that's kind of where I'll be looking for the rest of the talk. But I should note here that there are 3 types of stems. There is the hairpin, which then at its at the opposite end of the hairpin opens into a junction. There is the stem that connects 2 separate junctions or multi-loops. And then there is that stem which would ultimately close a design. Each one has slightly different energetics placed on it, different thermodynamic parameters. I have not followed that line of thought further than acknowledging it, but it might be worth a look at some point down the road. So I decided to try to create every design. As I've already shown, it's clearly impossible. But, you know, you start small and you work your way along. And it turns out the first structures we get right, they don't create a shape, right? we start with a dot and we work into a line. And it isn't until we get to 5 bases long that, in fact, we can create a shape, not one that we would expect to occur ever in nature, but at least one that works in principle. And as we add a single base, it turns out that there are categories of designs that, and this is a pattern that I noted. I'm sure there are other patterns, but this is the one I picked up on, is that the design you have for, let's say, 5 bases, when you go to 6, the design from 5 then gets ported over, but with a hairpin that's 1 base longer. And the same goes with this set here. I referred in my notes to these structures as tiers, emergent tiers of complexity in a design the longer they get. And it turns out that each time you add a base, you always run through the same sequence of uh, of designs from the 1 base shorter set of designs, and that uh, continues on, and of course the number goes up for every base we add. But we do encounter something else. Uh, we come to these designs that I've put here, what I've called redundant designs, but really what they are is not necessarily redundant in principle of them being unworthy RNAs, but rather I've called them redundant because the base structure itself, the number of base pairs and the size of the stem, really simply reciprocate those found at a previous level. And ultimately, they boil down to just a lengthening of the unpaired bases, the dangling ends in the structure. And of course, I could add another base and another base and another base to the end of this and continue that for thousands of bases. But the core structure itself doesn't really change. And so I've put those in a category of their own, at least in my kind of scheme. These are all the designs that you have for 10 bases. And all the ones for 11. All the previous ones from 10 that have gone up 1 base in their loop being noted at the top. And I recognize that there was kind of a pattern to how these designs emerge, or at least there seems to be. And so I plotted everything out on a table, and while not showing any pattern initially, by the time you get to 9 bases, we start doubling the amount of new designs that we get for both our strictly new designs and the ones that I've tossed into this redundant category due to the lengthening of dangling ends. And so I predict for 12 bases that we'll get this doubling effect continuing. We'll get 72 new designs, 72 of the prior designs, but with a larger hairpin loop, 56 new of my redundant set, and 56 of the previous redundant set, but with a bigger hairpin loop for 256 designs in total. I haven't drawn them all out yet, so we'll see if the pattern holds. Well, so what can we do with this information? And here I want to just kind of point out a lie. The whole point of our player puzzles, right, is to stabilize a design, to stabilize the structure. And that's just not quite true. Because RNAs don't assume a single structure. This was hinted at earlier, of course, in the talk of Joe from earlier, uh, RNAs are always in resonance through all possible shapes, um, moving through a spectrum of those possible shapes. And of course, the sequence itself will determine which shapes they are more likely to assume. But in principle, at least, there's always a bit of time that they spend in every confirmation, even ones that are not uh, even ones that are not traditional Watson-Crick base pairs. That is to say, the legal pairings we allow in the game. Uh, when we try to stabilize a structure, we narrow the range such that the RNA assumes a form most of the time, or a set of forms most of the time, but it never truly assumes just one, unless it's 4 nucleotides or shorter, in which case it can't form a shape at all. And of course, the tool we have for making sense of resonance is, in fact, the dot plot. This is something that many of us have seen in the labs, but I don't know if it was obvious to everyone just what it really was showing. Uh, it shows all those structures based on sequence and truth uh, that can be assumed by our RNA. Here, I have ignored sequence, and I've simply mapped out on here using similar colors uh, those the dot plot for every single structure for 8 nucleotides. The reality ends up being that while any sequence we input is going to take up a subset of this dot plot, it will always be a subset from this complete image of all the possible shapes. And in knowing this, um, it's a powerful thing, knowing how things move. It's been said in biology that form follows function. And so we see a paperclip, which of course is designed such that it can hold pieces of paper together by kind of pinching them together. But we can bend the paperclip into the form of a staple. And this too will serve to bring pieces of paper together, but it does so in a different way. Likewise, RNAs have different functions that they can assume. They have different binding preferences. And when we are creating a design in lab, there is the possibility that not the primary sequence we're using to create a specific shape, not that specific shape, but that sequence can assume an alternative shape. And even if we want one interaction to happen through the alternative conformations of the RNA, through resonance that it can assume, it's possible that the second or third most common form that the RNA goes through will in fact not bind to what we want, but even more, will have off-target binding. And this works against us, of course. So we can, in fact, use this knowledge in labs, because if we know the structures that can potentially form for an RNA or for a given part of that RNA, that can inform us the types of activities we would expect to happen from any one of those structures if they were to be assumed by the RNA. And that can direct which sequences we use to better stabilize structures we want to stabilize, but also to avoid any off-target interactions from RNAs in more sensitive labs, all the way back from logic gates, all the way through to our ribosome editing, mRNA editing labs, this is applicable. And that's it.